Hello and welcome. This is Margaret Moore. I'm co-director of the Institute of Coaching. I'm presenting to you a three-part masterclass webinar on the topic of positivity, something near and dear to my heart and a very important part of my coaching toolbox. Today we're going to present part one, and we'll explore some of the background and the evolutionary biology and evidence for why we need positive emotions, and also explore the interconnection and interdependence between positive physical health alongside positive mental health or positive emotions. So today's agenda is as follows. I'm going to start by talking about why we need positive emotions, what role they play, why they are much more than something that's nice to have, why they really are essential to our being able to handle what life throws our way. We're going to explore positive health, the connection between mental health, positive mental health, and positive physical health. I'm going to explore various ways to build positivity using a model which works for me really well, which is to think about it in terms of the past, the present, and the future. And hopefully that will give you many entry points for thinking about how to build positivity for yourself and help your clients do the same. We'll explore the top 10 positive emotions that Barbara Fredrickson has developed, and then coaching strategies to build those. And we'll close with a Q&A. So we're on the topic of negative emotions, and I was mentioning that there are some kinds of tasks where negative emotions are helpful. So a task like balancing your checkbook or doing some sort of financial decision, if you are too positive, you may have a bit too optimistic a view of things and may not make a good decision. So there are times when having an appropriate dose of negative emotions, concern about the future, concern about doing the right thing, a little bit of stress can actually be helpful. What we've also learned is that there are really two very different sort of experiences of positive and negative. So the negative is something that is unresolved. It's sort of begging to be addressed. And so it's asking for our attention. And so it's like Velcro. It sticks. It hangs on until it gets our attention. And that's why when we have a bad day, your dog puked on the carpet and the coffee machine broke and your car doesn't have enough gas and, and you get to the office and it's all piled up and it's very hard to break out of the Velcro of all those negative experiences. So I'm sure you can all relate that when we have negative emotions, they tend to hang on. However, the positive emotions are really things that are resolved. They're not calling for our attention. They're not calling for action. And so they're not designed to stay. They're more like Teflon. They slide away. And that's why it's so hard to hang on to them. And if any of you have done heart math, which is an exercise of getting your heart rate into a particular zone, and the means by which you do that is to focus on your heart first and then to summon positive emotions and hold on to them. And it's darn difficult to do that. I can tell you from my personal experience that, you'll say to yourself, oh gosh, I'm feeling fit today, and oh, but I didn't exercise yesterday. You don't even give yourself a moment to enjoy and appreciate the positive before it's polluted by the negative. So this is a real challenge for us, and it's a skill that is hard to build. Also, negative emotions actually have negative consequences. They can lead to more stress, depression, they can reduce performance, and they can reduce our connection to others. So thankfully, along came the world of positive psychology in the late 90s, founded by Marty Seligman, Chris Peterson, Csikszentmihalyi, and a few others. And they really focused their world in psychology on what's going right with people, what is working, what are their strengths, and what are their positive emotions. And as I mentioned, until that time, Barbara Fredrickson was an unknown and in the wilderness. Nobody knew her work, even though she had made some pivotal discoveries. And when the positive psychology world came alive, her work came out, and many thought and since think that her work is perhaps the most important contribution to the field of positive psychology. So what we had known is that research had shown, and Fredrickson has contributed to this over recent years, that positive emotions are not just things that come and go, that they actually are a lasting resource, and they impact on our well-being and even our longevity. And you might remember the story of the nuns, the study of the nuns in Marty Seligman's book, Authentic Happiness, where they looked at the entry essays of the nuns, which they kept for a long time when the nuns were 18 or 19 years old, and then they looked at their health and mortality and morbidity later in life. And the nuns who got a high score of positivity in their entry essays lived on average 10 years longer. Same thing happened, there's a study of dead psychologists, and they looked at all of their work, and they rated it, gave them a sort of positivity rating, and the psychologists who had the lower ratings had not lived as long. Now, in recent years, we've got an enormous meta-analysis of 250 studies that shows that people with optimal positivity and happiness are more successful in multiple life domains: relationship, finances, and health. So now there's a great deal more interest in positivity. You may know that just like in our physical health, that our own choices dictate approximately half of our health status. And if you add environment, it's even higher, more like 70%. A similar phenomenon is in place for for mental well-being. And so we also have a set point, just like we do, our genes drive our physical health. We have a set point when it comes to our happiness or positivity. However, 40% of our happiness is in fact based on our intentional activity. So we have a lot of say, and we are at the driver's seat around how we formulate a life that brings well-being and positivity. And in fact, our circumstances are worth only 10%. So whether we're born rich or poor, a terrible family or a healthy family, all that adds up to a fairly minor contribution. So Fredrickson's sort of has built on some of the other discoveries and has really brought home how fleeting positive emotions are. They're like butterflies, and how the negative emotions stick like Velcro. And that has really led to an appreciation that there is a certain ratio that we need, which I'm going to come to, that allows us to flourish. Now, what is it that positive emotions buys you? And these are very important points. So we know that negative emotions have a fairly immediate, quick impact. Positive emotions are more like planting seeds for flowers to grow. They work over time, and they accumulate over time. So first, they influence our thinking. When we have sufficient positive emotions, we are more open-minded, we're more flexible, we are less biased. There are studies around people looking at pictures of people with different races, and that people are more accepting of races that are different from their own when they are feeling good. We're more creative, we're more adaptable. We have a bigger peripheral vision, so we have a wider perspective. And we are more likely to see the big picture and not get lost in the trees. So our brains, to work best, need sufficient positive emotions. Positive emotions also build resources. So over time, our memory gets better. Over time, our psychological resources, like our confidence and resilience, build. Over time, our social connections grow. And over time, our health gets better. So in the moment and immediately, positive emotions make us think better. And then over time, they build resources and our capacity to function. So what's the ideal? And is it possible to be too positive? So the seminal study that determined, with using very complex mathematical algorithms, was based on a collaboration between Fredrickson and a psychologist and business consultant, Dr. Lasada. And Lasada had collected videotapes of team meetings from 60 business teams over time. It was a vast library. And what they decided to do together was to code these meetings, so they had the videos, for the number of positive and negative kind of bites, sound bites, and then analyzed them. And they also had data that showed the outcomes of these teams, whether it was sales or profitability or customer satisfaction or the performance review that the team got for its accomplishments. And if you've ever seen the graph, it's this massive spectrum of dots, and there's a very clear tipping point. And basically what it showed that is if the ratio of positive to negative was below 3-to-1, then the teams performed poorly. If the ratio was above 3-to-1, they performed at peak. And the other interesting thing is above 11-to-1, performance dropped right back down to the level of the below 3-to-1. So it is possible to be too positive. So there is a range there. But clearly, certainly in the work world, one needs to get into that sweet spot. This has been validated by work in the marriage world, where the ratio that predicts a successful marriage is 5-to-1. It's higher than for in our individual lives, and I think that's just a sign of how tough it is to have a positive, strong marriage, because we're so tempted to focus on our mate's negative aspects. And so that confirmed it. And then Fredrickson went back and looked at all of her data across all her studies, and she showed that the ratio that worked with the individuals in all these studies was around 3.7-to-1. So that's where this magical 3-to-1 ratio comes from. And one individually and in groups really wants to get above this level. I think one of the most important things that Fredrickson did was the paper she published last year. And I see this as the equivalent of discovering gravity. This is really about what is happiness. And what she asked was, what is the driver of what? So is life satisfaction caused by positive emotions? Are resilient people more satisfied with their lives and have more positive emotions? Or do emotions drive these things? So what is driving what? Do we feel good about our lives and then we're more positive and we're more resilient? So she managed to untangle the connections among these three concepts and showed that positive emotions increase life satisfaction via the mechanism of building resilience. So what that means is that the people with the highest level of life satisfaction are at that level not because they savor life more than others. It's because they're more resilient. They are more able to bounce back from life's challenges. So it's not about having a $5 million house. It's not about living in your dream town. Life satisfaction is predicted by resilience. And what she also showed is that what drives resilience is positive emotions. And so in order to be resilient, which means to cope with what life throws at us, because life is not designed to be easy, then we need the positivity. And if we're resilient, then we will feel good about our lives. And so in my mind, that has given coaches the mandate to, in fact, focus on building positivity, not as the only thing we do. It's one of the several things, big things that we do, but it is a very important thing that we do, because if we build positivity, we're building resilience, and that's going to lead to better life satisfaction. So this must be a focus of what coaches do. Here are a couple of quotes from Fredrickson's book. The sparkle of good feelings, the positive emotions, awakens the motivation to change. And what that really says is that often people have the internal motivation there, but they don't have sufficient positive emotions for it to bubble up and appear. And so, in fact, positivity unleashes motivation. Her other quote, which I love, is that positivity starts a psychological chain reaction that allows you to step up to the next level of existence. And so you're more wanting and engaged in tackling the next stage of your life when you've got sufficient positivity. So to summarize, there is a tipping point here in resilience and even in life satisfaction. Above the tipping point 3 to 1, people have the resources to change and to grow. They also have the ability to bounce back from adversity. They have the ability to flourish, and they are on an upward spiral. Below that, and it's a clear break, people languish. They're less resilient. They struggle with adversity. They're not flourishing, and even more, they're in a downward spiral. So very important to know where you stand with this, and there's a ratio now online. It's free at www.positivityratio.com, and it's well worth doing this several times over a week or so to really get a sense for where you're at. And I know some of you who've been working with this material would agree that when you start having clients, coaching clients, do this ratio, they are often very surprised at how low their levels are. And it takes the load off us explaining that what we're hearing is a whole lot of negative self-talk, a whole lot of shoulds and not enough positivity. And here we have a valid and objective measure, which gives people a real starting point. And it's a real starting point for measuring outcomes, because if people move up to a higher ratio, their capacity to change moves up. So I want to then sidetrack to thinking about positive emotions and physical health, because this is another reason why those of us in health and wellness coaching need to be really engaged in this work. So Marty Seligman wrote a paper 2 years ago that defined positive health. Now, those of us who've been in the wellness arena will say, gosh, this is exactly what wellness is. This isn't new. But that's the positive psychologists are calling this positive health. And Seligman has raised a $3 million grant to really help build this field. And the idea is that positive health, so that's optimal health, is definable and measurable. That we don't know exactly what that means in terms of specific things to measure and numbers. I mean, there's some guesses, but there's more to be done there. And then the hypothesis is that positive health, so that's above neutral, predicts aging well, decreases healthcare costs, and improves the outcomes when people are ill. And there's more research on this, which I'll share a little bit about, but what this really is saying is that mental health, via the positive psychology definition, positive emotions, meaning, engagement, relationships, achievement, all those things, predict a lack of depression and improved physical health. So mental health and physical health are extremely interrelated. Ed Diener, in his book on psychological wealth, has a chapter on happiness and health. I think it's the most recent chapter. It's about a year and a bit old. And so he summarizes the research, and we now know that chronic stress damages our health, because we now know that the telomeres, the little shoelace ends at the end of our genes, if we're under extreme chronic stress, they get frayed, they wear down, and so our genes age faster under chronic stress. So people age more quickly under severe stress. We also now know that long-term positive emotions prevent illness and they reduce morbidity. And I told you about the Nun study, which is the 10-year impact on longevity. When you add all the other literature together, then it's actually closer to 3 or 4 years. It's similar to the literature around smoking and its impact on longevity. We also know that people with high levels of positivity have more effective immune systems, and some of the nicest research in this has been done with viruses and cold and flu viruses and infecting people and looking at their levels of negative emotions in the 2 weeks prior to the infection, as well as levels of positive emotions. And then they look at objective measures like what's the viral load, how many viruses are in the blood. They look at the antibody levels, which is the immune response to the viral load, which is an indicator of the load of infection. They look at the real symptoms, so they actually weighed Kleenexes, if you can believe it. And then they looked at perceived symptoms. You know, how sick do you feel? How ill do you feel? How yucky do you feel? And what they've shown across a few studies is that the level of negative emotions has no impact on the infection rate. So whether they're high or low, it didn't impact infection rates. It didn't impact perceived symptoms or real symptoms. No significant difference. However, the level of positive emotions had a very significant difference, up to 50% in some of the measures. So that means that the people with higher levels of positivity, even in the face of high levels of negativity, had fewer viruses in their blood, a lower level of antibodies, their Kleenexes weighed less, and they felt better with the same viral load as someone who was not experiencing the same level of positive emotions. We also know that positive emotions reduce physical symptoms. So if you have pain or arthritis or migraines, all of those symptoms are, in fact, less profound when you have a higher level of positivity. We also know, too, that happy people are more likely to engage in healthy behaviors. And, so to summarize, all this really leads us as coaches to recognize that to help clients improve their physical health, we actually need to be addressing their mental health and their positivity. I like to think about positivity and health as really a two-way street. So when we feel good and healthy, and maybe most of you here today are feeling that way, that generates positivity. Also, when we feel good emotionally, we're generating positive health. So it really is an upward spiral. If you just think about what it feels like when you've had the flu, you probably felt pretty low. If you had a lot of pain, you had a bad injury. And so it's not surprising that your physical health state has a big impact on your mental health state. And it goes both ways.